Everyone thinks that teens in our world today use alcohol, tobacco, or drugs to cope with everyday struggles. You may think they do,
but they don't. Welcome to the But They Don't podcast, a podcast for teens by teens. Join us as we cover substance use prevention, mental health, community conversations, and more.
Hello and welcome back to the But They Don't podcast. I'm Maggie and I'm joined today by Gabe, Kayley, and producer Tana.
Hello.
Hello.
So on this episode, we're going to be discussing different types of platforms and how you can use your platforms for good to reach anybody you need to.
Most people would think a platform is just your social media, but to me, it's much more than that. My platform is my experience and how I've watched it affect other people and myself. How about you, Gabe?
For me, when I think of platform, I think of the status that somebody has, like who they talk to, who they hang around. So basically your sphere of influence. So whatever you say, whoever it's going to reach in like the group around you. That's what I would think of.
What are some different types of platforms that we can use on the youth board and or individually?
I would definitely say social media, but also your connections with people in your community.
I agree with that. So I would think a lot of school organizations, so a lot of us participate in extracurriculars outside of school, so you can reach out to leaders of bands, you can do groups that school has, like student council, things like that. Basically, like important school leaders that are gonna be able to help you spread your message.
So what are some ways you guys have used your platforms for good, or how can people use their own platforms for good?
Well, like I have been through people who have struggled with addiction and watched it. So when my paths cross with people who need to relate to somebody who understands, I'm there to just let them know the effects and how it's had effects on me so they can relate.
And I think in more of like a hypothetical situation, even if you haven't had past experiences with these kinds of troubles or things like that, you can reach out to leaders in your community. So if you have jobs, because a lot of teenagers will start getting jobs around that age, so you can reach out to like business owners or managers to kind of partner with businesses in your area to form like new things like that, and reach out to any other community leaders, so like board members or like city council, things like that, just to spread your message.
Do you guys have any tips you'd like to share on how to effectively get your message across to your peers?
So while we were brainstorming ideas for this episode, we kind of came up with 3 R's that we can use. So the first one would be reliable. So whenever you're spreading information or trying to reach out to people, you want to make sure that the information you're putting out is reliable and it's accurate, because number one, if you're not spreading true information, then that's going to cause problems. You just want to make sure that what you're saying is backed up and you're being a reliable source.
The second R we came up with was relatable. So when your paths cross with somebody who is going through something, that you can relate to that person so they don't feel alone, and that they know that you have an understanding of what they're going through.
Especially because sometimes it's difficult to build trust with somebody if you guys don't have something in common. So trying to relate to people in small ways can always help build that trust, which makes it easier for them to come to you and talk to you if you ever need anything. And the last R we thought of was resources. So that's what we were talking about earlier, reaching out to people you have, using any connections that you or your family may have to talk to people to help spread that message. Just use what is at your availability, because the more that you take advantage of, the more that you're going to be able to get out what you're trying to say. This message is brought to you by PCYB. Did you know that 2% of the world, or close to 160 million people, have an alcohol or illicit drug addiction? You may think these addictions define them, but they don't. Now back to the podcast.
Another good point when considering how to use your platform is the impact of your decisions. So if you make good decisions, then it impacts your life in a good way. But if making bad decisions is going to impact your life in a bad way.
Right, and the decisions that you make don't always define you. They don't define you, because you can always change. But you want to make sure that the things you're doing are are choices that you won't regret. You need to think through what you do before you make those decisions, because regardless of if it's a good decision or a bad decision, they're going to stick with you.
This is our natural high. So for me, my natural high is working with children, because working with kids just boosts my serotonin to make me happy. So working with kids, it helps me heal my inner child from childhood trauma, and it makes my mental health better, because being around kids, they're happy. Like, they're happy, and it's very enjoyable to be around. So if I'm struggling being around a bunch of kids that when they're just smiling or either screaming, they haven't felt the world yet. So it just boosts your happiness, and that is my natural high, being around kids.
And that also definitely helps a lot, because adults in our time, a lot of them didn't, or like mental health wasn't as big of an issue as it is now, or it wasn't as prominent. So it's helpful to kind of be educated on that subject, or have like people to educate on that subject, because the more that we like spread the word about mental health and the way that it affects everybody, the more it's going to be an issue that's sought after and like actively looked for solutions, just ways that we can help with mental health now in this world where it's such a prominent deal.
That's all we have today.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the But They Don't podcast, and we'll see you guys next time.
Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok.